Healing stories are among the most beautiful, human, hopeful stories in the Bible. And they are also, at least in my experience, among the most difficult to think and talk about. There are probably 100 pitfalls when you're talking about a healing story like the one we just heard from the Gospel of Mark. I want to mention just two that I am personally familiar with this morning. On the one side, there is the danger of making healing seem simple. Like there is a universal prescription for every ailment, and the name of that prescription is Jesus. It's very possible to look at one of these stories where Jesus just shows up and miraculously heals someone and imagine that it is always that simple. Just pray, have faith, and Jesus will make you well in exactly the way you wish. I suppose this is the danger that I have been most personally aware of when it comes to healing stories, the one that I am very careful to steer clear of. I don't want to fall off that cliff because I've seen what that looks like. I've seen people praying desperately to be healed who haven't had the illness subside. I've seen people wondering if the problem is with them not having enough faith or not using the magic words. And I've seen anxiety and guilt then pile on top of their illness. I've seen what a terrific mess that all adds up to. And so I'm pretty careful to steer about as clear from that side of the road as I possibly can. A little bit too careful sometimes, so that I can end up near the drop-off on the other side, the one that says basically, well, we shouldn't expect much of anything to happen when we ask for healing. Years ago, when I was doing my pastoral internship in a university campus, the project I chose for the year was to run a healing service several times during the year. I had participated in simple worship services that included prayers for healing before, and I was interested in trying this out with the students I was working with. And in the announcement that I made about the services, I kind of bent over backwards to say, don't expect this is magic. Don't expect everything to be instantly fixed because you come to the chapel on Wednesday night. I wanted to be very clear about that. And I guess I was, because one student contacted me to ask something like, do you think anything at all is going to happen? And if not, why are you doing this? It was a perfectly reasonable question. So it's not easy to think and talk about a healing story like the one we have in front of us from Mark this morning. But my sense is that the way through goes somewhere between those two drop-offs. The one that says, it's all simple, just pray and you'll be healed, and the one that says, don't think anything is going to change. I still don't know exactly what that middle path looks like, but I hope we're somewhere close to that as we think together this morning with a little bit of help from the Gospel of Mark. I suppose the first thing to notice when it comes to healing in this particular gospel is that it matters to Jesus. We kind of take that as a given, since all the Gospels agree that Jesus did a lot of healing. They all paint the picture of Jesus as someone who touched people who were suffering and made them well. That's kind of Jesus 101, we might say. But if you were reading Mark's account of the life of Jesus for the first time, this fact would definitely not be a given for you, based on the way that things start. Jesus emerges from the river after his baptism, tangles with the devil in the wilderness, and comes back into human society with a burning passion and a very clear, forceful message. The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God has come near, he says. That's a message that is cosmic in scale. It's about the beginning of a whole new age, the wheels of history turning toward the future that God has in store. And you could very well imagine that a person with a message that big would not have time to pay attention to Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Jesus bursts into town with this message about the new era beginning to dawn, and Simon says, "Excuse me, Jesus, my mother-in-law has a fever." You could imagine a leader who would see that concern as too small too individualistic, almost too selfish, given the immense grand purposes that he has in mind. He came to turn the world toward God's future, after all. Does he really have time for one sick person? And the answer, of course, is yes. And that's important to notice. When Jesus comes proclaiming the new age and embodying the ways of God, he does not look past the suffering of individuals. No. In fact, it's just the opposite. Jesus shows that in God's eyes, the suffering of each person matters greatly. The God of the cosmos cares for each and every life. There's nothing obvious about that idea, and we should never lose sight of that fact when we are talking about a healing story. It is this amazing and beautiful claim. And maybe the second thing to notice is that healing stories in the gospel are almost always much broader and more complex than we might think. The story of Simon Peter's mother-in-law is a perfect example. On the one hand, it is about as straightforward and simple as you can imagine a healing story being. I mean, the disciples tell Jesus about this woman who has a fever. Jesus takes her by the hand. The fever is gone. Simple, right? Yes and no. I mean, yes, she is healed in that immediate way of her temperature going down. And anyone who has had a serious fever knows what a relief that is. But in its own subtle way, the story also points to another kind of healing that took place here, one that goes beyond the purely physical as well. We're told that when the fever left her, Simon Peter's mother-in-law began to serve the guests in her home. And there's a part of us that might wince a little bit at hearing that, like this is a clear window into just how patriarchal this society really was. I mean, couldn't the men have taken care of the evening meal, given that this poor woman has just recovered from a serious illness? And I'm not saying there's nothing to that concern. There's no question patriarchy is pervasive and very powerful. But in this particular story, there's also reason to believe that more is going on. Because the root word used here for her serving the others is diakonia. It's the source of our English word deacon. It's the word used in the Gospels for precisely the kind of life that Jesus has in mind for his followers. Lives that are lived in service to others. Later on in the Gospel, the male disciples will get into a pathetic argument about who gets to sit at Jesus' right hand when he comes in glory. And Jesus will remind them that while the leaders of the world jockey for power and influence, they are called to something else. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Simon Peter's mother-in-law seems to get that right from the start of the gospel. Her behavior here shows that she understands something profound about what a whole and fulfilled life looks like. It looks like concern for others beyond yourself. It looks like service. And maybe that is also part of her healing. We're used to hearing that serving others is a good thing, something that we're supposed to do. But it's also a part of health, of human flourishing. In a beautiful newspaper piece a while back, the Dalai Lama wrote about this, tying the anxiety and fear rising in many wealthy societies to people fearing that they are not needed. When we have this sense that we are positively contributing to the world around us, that we're connected to others and able to serve in a meaningful way, he said, we thrive. And when we feel disconnected and unable to contribute toward the well-being of others, we become anxious and fearful. Studies today are confirming what religions have taught about human health for thousands of years. Serving is part of living a whole life. The Dalai Lama quotes an ancient Buddhist proverb that says this beautifully. If one lights a fire for others, it will also brighten one's own way. So when it comes to Simon Peter's mother-in-law, healing has more than one dimension. Not only is she healed from her illness, she's also returned to service, to the sort of caring for others that is so much a part of living well. So I think it's important to notice that healing isn't just one thing here, because that's the way it is with Jesus. Really, in story after story, you can see so much of what he does as offering and enacting healing. I mean, when he teaches about forgiveness, about allowing the walls that have grown up around your spirit to crumble, isn't that a nudge toward healing? And when he looks at a rich young man and invites him to sell everything that is holding him back and come see what the kingdom looks like, isn't that an invitation to healing? And when he shares his table with prostitutes and tax collectors and others nobody wanted to spend time with, when he shows them that they are precious, isn't that a sort of healing? And when he greets Zacchaeus in front of everyone, when he treats this man that no one cared for as his friend, and thereby restores him to his community, isn't that a kind of healing? Healing looks like many things in the Gospels. Yes, sometimes like healed bodies, but also like spirits and relationships and communities restored to the kind of wholeness God has always had in mind. And so when we pray for healing, I think the invitation is to be open. To be open to the many ways that God means to work out wholeness in our lives and in the lives of those we love. The many shapes and forms that that might take, often far beyond our imagining. In all the mystery of healing, what is certain is that our wholeness matters to God. There's no suffering that is beyond God's concern, no life that God doesn't cherish and hold on to. And during the hymn we're going to sing in just a moment, you are invited to come here to the altar for a prayer for healing. It might be for you, or it might be for someone else. If you wish, you can say a word about the specific request for prayer, or you can simply come in silence. Stand or kneel, and someone will lay hands on your head and pray for you. Then return to your seat to make space for the next person. So now we come, bringing all in us that longs for healing, or in those we love. We come praying in confidence, with as much openness as we can muster. And we come, trusting that no matter what, we are held in the hands of God that carry all, from death to life. Amen.